By late 1943, Japanese pilots already knew the war in the air was changing. The rules they had mastered, climb, turn, strike, disengage, no longer worked the way they once did. The Zero, once unbeatable, now faced an enemy that refused to fall. The Hellcat had forced caution. It punished mistakes. It survived damage that should have ended fights. And Japanese pilots adapted. They learned restraint. They learned when to break away. They learned how to survive against an aircraft that owned altitude and numbers. For a moment, they believed this was enough. Then something worse arrived. Not another refinement, not another experiment, but an aircraft that did not merely counter Japanese tactics. It attacked the last places where survival still seemed possible. It did not wait. It did not hesitate. It did not slow down. The Corsair entered the Pacific quietly, without ceremony. But for the pilots who met it in the air, the difference was immediate and terrifying. Where the Hellcat controlled the fight, the Corsair overwhelmed it. Where caution once offered safety, speed now erased it. For Japanese pilots, this was not just another enemy aircraft. It was the moment adaptation stopped working. What followed was not a gradual decline, but a sudden realization. The sky was no longer something to be mastered. It was something to endure. February 1944. High above the northern Solomon Islands, just after sunrise. The air is already turbulent. Heat rises off the jungle below in shimmering waves, and scattered cloud layers hang at uneven altitudes, perfect terrain for ambushes, mistakes, and sudden death. Japanese pilots have learned to read skies like this. For years, it has been their advantage. Inside the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0, Petty Officer First Class Hiroshi Tanaka steadies his breathing and scans the horizon. He is experienced. Not an ace, but not new. Tanaka has survived the transition from early war dominance to the uneasy months when American fighters stopped behaving as expected. He knows about the Hellcat. He knows its strengths. More importantly, he knows how to avoid it. Climb is dangerous. Prolonged chases are suicide. One pass, break away, live to fight again. That is the new reality. Ahead, a radio call crackles. Enemy fighters, low altitude, multiple contacts. Tanaka narrows his eyes. The silhouettes below are wrong. They are larger than Wildcats, heavier than Zeros. The wings look bent, almost broken, angled sharply downward before sweeping up again. The fuselage is long, aggressive, unmistakable once you've seen it. Corsairs. The Vought F4U is still new to the Japanese. Intelligence briefings mention it in passing, fast, powerful, dangerous at speed, but few pilots have faced it directly. Most assume it will behave like other American fighters, strong in a dive, clumsy in turns, vulnerable if forced into close combat. Tanaka signals the attack. Zeros roll in smoothly, noses dropping, airspeed building. The plan is familiar high-speed approach, short burst, immediate breakaway. No climbing, no lingering. As Tanaka lines up his shot, the Corsair ahead of him does something unexpected. It rolls, not slowly, not defensively. The aircraft snaps into a sharp, high-speed roll, reversing direction in an instant. Tanaka fires, but the American fighter is already gone, slashing across his field of vision, crossing beneath him with frightening speed. Before Tanaka can react, something flashes past his canopy. Another Corsair. The Zero shudders as heavy machine gun fire tears through the air around him. Tanaka pulls hard, instinctively tightening the turn. This is where the Zero should win. The Corsair stays with him, not perfectly, not gracefully, but close enough. Tanaka feels it immediately. The Zero bleeds speed, its controls lightening as the turn tightens. The Corsair does not stall. It does not fall away. Instead, it powers through the maneuver, engine roaring, wings biting into the air far harder than Tanaka expects. This is wrong. The Corsair should not be here. Tanaka breaks away, diving hard toward the deck. The Corsair follows not cautiously, but aggressively, closing distance faster than the Hellcat ever did in similar situations. The American pilot does not hesitate. He does not wait for perfect angles. He trusts the aircraft. And the aircraft delivers. Tanaka levels out just meters above the jungle canopy, pushing the Zero to its limits. The Corsair overshoots, but instead of disengaging, it climbs sharply, rolls, and comes back down in a maneuver Tanaka has never seen executed so violently at such low altitude. The engagement lasts less than a minute. When it's over, 2 Zeros are gone. The Corsairs lose none. As Tanaka limps away, shaken but alive, one thought dominates his mind, not fear, not anger, but realization. This aircraft is not just another Hellcat. It is something else entirely. By March 1944, Japanese pilots are no longer mistaking the Corsair for another American experiment. Reports from the Solomons, Rabaul, and New Guinea all describe the same thing, an aircraft that behaves aggressively at speeds where the Zero becomes fragile. Briefings grow more urgent. Do not turn with it at speed. Do not assume it will overshoot. Do not rely on low altitude for safety. These warnings are unsettling because they remove the last comfort Japanese pilots still possess. The Hellcat dominates through structure. The Corsair dominates through violence. It dives faster than the Zero can safely follow. It rolls faster than Japanese pilots expect at any speed. And most dangerously, it retains control in maneuvers that should bleed energy. Zeros attempt textbook responses. They tighten turns, force scissors, try to draw the Corsair into slow, delicate engagements where finesse once mattered. But the Corsair refuses to slow down. It fights on its own terms fast, brutal, unforgiving. Japanese pilots begin to describe it differently. Not as strong, not as durable, but as angry. The Corsair attacks from unexpected angles, pulling through maneuvers that feel reckless but work. Because the aircraft can endure stress the Zero cannot. Its massive engine allows it to regain speed almost instantly. Its heavy wings bite into the air even when pushed hard. And when mistakes happen, as they always do, the American pilot lives, this is the most devastating difference. Japanese pilots are now facing two American fighters with complementary strengths. The Hellcat controls altitude and formation. The Corsair hunts aggressively, punishing hesitation and exploiting chaos. Together, they compress Japanese options to almost nothing. Radio traffic reflects the shift. Pilots call out Corsairs with urgency reserved for emergencies. Engagements are broken off immediately when possible. Veterans warn younger pilots not to test the aircraft, not even once. One Japanese pilot later writes, "With the Hellcat, we feared pursuit. With the Corsair, we feared contact. That fear is rational." In repeated engagements, Japanese pilots discover that even successful defensive maneuvers cost them more than they gain. Tight turns bleed speed, the Corsair recovers instantly. Low altitude escapes end with Corsairs climbing, rolling, and returning before the Zero can reposition. What was once refuge becomes trap. Commanders scramble to respond, but the problem is no longer tactical alone. The Corsair does not simply counter Japanese doctrine. It attacks the remaining margins where survival was still possible. And those margins are shrinking fast. By late spring 1944, a grim consensus forms among experienced pilots. If the Hellcat ended dominance, the Corsair ends resistance. Because unlike the Hellcat, which rewards discipline, the Corsair rewards aggression, and it does so with power Japanese aircraft cannot match. The sky is no longer just dangerous. It is hostile. They ask where they can survive it. The answer, increasingly, is nowhere. For years, Japanese air combat doctrine rested on a simple truth. Every enemy aircraft had a weakness. If it was fast, it could not turn. If it turned well, it could not dive. If it dove, it would overshoot. The Corsair breaks that logic. At high speed, where the Zero becomes stiff and unforgiving, the Corsair remains controllable. Its massive engine pulls it through dives that feel bottomless. Its airframe holds together under stresses that would tear lighter fighters apart. And when it rolls fast, violent, almost casual, it does so with authority Japanese pilots cannot match. The Zero now has no safe speed. Slow down, and you invite slashing attacks that bleed energy you cannot recover. Speed up, and your controls stiffen while the Corsair stays responsive. Dive, and it follows. Turn, and it stays close enough to kill. Japanese pilots begin describing engagements in terms of escape windows rather than tactics. Seconds matter, altitude matters, timing matters. And the Corsair steals all three. American pilots exploit this mercilessly. Corsairs attack from angles. Hellcats usually avoid low, fast, and aggressive. They do not wait for perfect positioning. They trust raw power and structural strength to carry them through mistakes. When they miss, they climb away. When they overshoot, they roll back in. When they take hits, they keep flying. The Zero does not get second chances. Japanese pilots notice something else, too, something more disturbing. The Corsair pilot does not disengage when things get messy. Where Hellcat pilots often break off to re-establish formation and altitude, Corsair pilots press the fight. They chase through turbulence, cloud edges, and low-altitude chaos. They force decisions quickly. And quick decisions favor the aircraft that forgives errors. Japanese pilots adapt again, but each adaptation removes another option. Engagements become shorter, attacks more cautious, disengagement earlier. The Corsair punishes all of it. By summer 1944, Japanese losses against Corsair units are disproportionate even by late war standards. Veteran pilots fall. New pilots, last minutes. The difference in aircraft capability magnifies every mistake until experience barely matters. One surviving pilot later writes, "Against the Hellcat, we learned to avoid mistakes. Against the Corsair, mistakes came too fast." This is the final shift. The Hellcat made Japanese pilots cautious. The Corsair makes them reactive. They are no longer planning engagements. They are responding to threats already unfolding. And once air combat becomes reaction instead of choice, the outcome is already decided. The Corsair does not merely dominate the sky. It removes the possibility of control. They measure them in seconds survived. The Corsair is now a constant presence over the Pacific, operating from island airstrips, escort carriers, and forward bases carved out of jungle and coral. It appears, suddenly, attacks violently, and disappears just as fast. There is no predictable pattern to exploit. For Japanese pilots, this is terrifying. Skill once meant options. Experience once meant control. Now, neither guarantees survival. Veteran pilots attempt to teach restraint to newcomers, but the lessons are abstract compared to the reality of combat. Training hours are minimal, fuel is scarce. Many pilots enter battle having never practiced the very maneuvers they are told to rely on. And the Corsair gives no margin for hesitation. When engagements begin, they unfold too quickly. A Zero spots a Corsair late. The American fighter dives immediately, closing distance in seconds. There's no time to evaluate angles, no time to plan an escape. Instinct takes over, and instinct was trained for a different war. Japanese pilots pull into turns that once worked. The Corsair stays with them. They dive, hoping to build separation. The Corsair follows and closes. Some attempt head-on passes, gambling everything on a single burst. The Corsair's heavy firepower makes this a deadly choice. Even near misses shake the Zero violently, and any hit at all is often fatal. Losses mount rapidly. American pilots, meanwhile, feel the difference clearly. Corsair squadrons report fewer prolonged dogfights and more decisive engagements. Japanese aircraft break off sooner, fly lower, and scatter quickly under pressure. The enemy is still brave, but bravery cannot compensate for an aircraft that dominates speed, climb, and control. By this stage, Japanese air doctrine has collapsed into improvisation. Pilots are told to avoid Corsairs whenever possible. Missions emphasize interception rather than engagement. Survival replaces initiative. Yet even avoidance is difficult. The Corsair's speed allows it to dictate contact. It chooses when to engage and when to disengage. Japanese pilots do neither. One surviving aviator later reflects, "We were no longer flying to fight. We were flying to endure." This is the quiet end of Japanese fighter resistance. Not with the dramatic final battle, but with the erosion of confidence, the shrinking of options, and the realization that even perfect execution cannot overcome the imbalance. The Corsair does not need to outfly every Zero. It only needs to remove hope. It can only be survived briefly. The Corsair still arrives without warning. Its silhouette appears high and fast, already positioned to strike. For Japanese pilots scrambling from battered airfields or makeshift island strips, there is no illusion of parity. The moment wheels leave the ground, they are already behind. Fuel is rationed. Training flights are rare. Many pilots flying now have only a handful of hours in combat aircraft. They are taught procedures, not tactics. Survival is discussed in theory, not practiced in air. Against the Corsair, theory collapses instantly. American pilots dive from altitude with overwhelming speed, firing short, devastating bursts before pulling away and climbing back into safety. There's no dogfight, no circling contest of skill. Just impact, separation, and return. Japanese pilots fly straight and low, hoping to delay detection. Some remember when low altitude once meant refuge. Now it is only a place where the Corsair arrives faster. Veterans feel the weight of history pressing down on them. They remember the early war, when experience ruled and aircraft answered gently to the lightest touch. They know those days are gone. What remains is a sky controlled by power, structure, and systems they cannot match. The Corsair represents all of it. It forgives aggressive mistakes. It survives damage. It lets its pilots learn faster than the enemy can replace men. By this stage, tactics have become irrelevant. Even intelligent adaptation cannot overcome an aircraft that compresses time and decision-making this brutally. The Corsair does not just defeat Japanese pilots, it denies them the space to think. Some missions end before they begin. Others end seconds after contact. For those who return, the realization is absolute. Air superiority was lost long before this moment. It was lost when survivability became the decisive advantage and Japanese aviation could not follow. The Corsair did not arrive to finish the war in the air. It arrived to make resistance impossible. And when resistance disappears, tactics no longer matter. The sky belongs to someone else now.